You can?
We can see it now. Please go ahead.
Okay, awesome. Okay, thank you. Hi, everybody. My apologies again for the hold up. It was not intentional. I don't even know what's going on at this point. But okay, fine. Without wasting more time, let us get into it. So today I'm going to be talking about DocOps. So, like I said in the title of the presentation, I like to think of DocOps as DevOps, but for technical writers. And you're probably wondering, oh, what is DocOps? I remember I had this community of, just development people that I am part of. And then the first time I mentioned DocOps to them, they were like, "Oh my God, what is this? How does this help? What does this do?" And all of that. And DocOps is actually it's not as new a concept as people think it is, and it's been around for a while. And the funny thing, like I mentioned to somebody, is that people actually DocOps, but then they do not know. But let me not spill everything here at once. Let's get into it. So, what is DocOps? DocOps stands for documentation operations. When I explain DocOps, I like to explain DocOps with DevOps. So, what is I think a good way to understand DocOps is to understand what first. So, what is DevOps? DevOps is like marrying development and operations. There's this example that I usually use to describe a DevOps workflow. So think of a lemonade stand, right? So in a lemonade stand, there are the people making the lemonade, probably the people setting up the stand, and then the people selling the lemonade or marketing the lemonade, as the case might be. So instead of these different teams building in isolation, say the people making the lemonade are at the backyard, the people building are at one country, and then the people marketing are at a different country or a different space, all working individually, and none of them, there isn't any synergy, there's no communication, there's nothing. Everybody's building something at their own pace, at their own time. It doesn't always end well because there would be discrepancies. Say, the stand is ready before the lemonade, or you market more lemonade than you have, or you make more lemonade than you're able to sell, and blah 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 blah. So what DevOps does, and in turn DocOps, but as relates to documentation, is that it creates a sort of synergy, between these teams. It creates a way for these teams to come together. That's quite literally in the name. DevOps is development and operations, while DocOps is documentation and operations. So it creates a way for all these things to work together without anybody building in isolation. So we have the core components of DocOps are automation, integration, collaboration, and continuous improvement. So I'll talk about them separately. Let's go to the automation to reduce manual efforts and ensure consistency. When when I get to the tools, then I can talk about automation more. But then with automation, we what how DocOps helps in automation is that there are these human tasks when it comes to when we're writing that are, I would like to call them unnecessary or a bit outdated. For example, my favorite tool to describe this is Grammarly, or any grammar checker there is. I personally use Grammarly. So you see, with Grammarly, you can actually reduce the work of, going line by line, text by text, checking for consistency, checking for tone, and all of that. Imputing your text or your documentation in Grammarly, it makes that easy. It just goes straight up like that, and then you have everything reviewed, you have everything edited. This way, when you don't have to spend so much time on editing a document, it shortens the workflow. Another tool that I like to use for automation, or I like to give as an example for automation, and this is for automating actually developing documentation, where you don't spend time developing the documentation anymore. You spend your time more on refining already developed documentation. So there are these tools that actually generate documentation from code comments. There are like Java docs and Sphinx and the rest of them. These tools actually look at the code you've written and the comments you've written on this code, and then they generate documentation for you from there. So your work is to actually just maybe look at the documentation that was generated, fine tune it, and just make it sound more human friendly and not, just overly machine lagged. And then the integration, like I talked about, it says to seamlessly connect development documentation tools with development tools. The whole point of DocOps, DevOps, everything is not the whole point, but then one of the main points is the synergy. It also works with collaboration. It's the synergy because DevOps was created so that these teams do not work in silos. So there is a sort of real-time collaboration so that everybody is meeting expected ends at the same time. So the same thing with DocOps, where the documentation team is working closely with the development team and also the operations team. Not a product is ready, it's maybe shipped, or a feature is ready, it's shipped, and then the documentation is lagging. The documentation engineers or specialists haven't caught up with the product, or a product is being marketed or it's being tested, and then there isn't sufficient documentation. All these things create problems both internally and then externally. It's not a good look for the organization. So that is where the collaboration comes in. It encourages team-wide input and updates. Let's move ahead. So why adopt DocOps? Improved accuracy, enhanced collaboration, and better compliance. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of organizations are actually working with DocOps, or in the process of DocOps, but they do not know that it is DocOps exactly. And so, just to make it plain, basically anything you do that fosters these three things, as it were, is actually DocOps. You're improving your accuracy. So, like I mentioned, for something like Grammarly, right? So you're already automating your editing. You don't have to waste time going line by line by line in editing, where maybe you can get confused, you can make a mistake, you might not see something or being able to pick it out on time. Tools like Grammarly and maybe Quillbot and other checkers like that, you can up to date, like real time, stay on editing your documentation. Of course, tools like Java Docs that generate documentation from your code actually improves the accuracy of the documentation because it is being generated per the code that is being written. So there's no, discrepancy in documentation, and enhances collaboration. So different teams use things like Notion. Notion, for example, is a tool for DocOps because with Notion, there's synergy. You can get to work together as a team where the dev team is working, the docs team is working, the operations, the testing team, they're all working together. No, there's no lag, and nobody no one team is working separately, the other team is not working separately. Then better compliance, maintain up to date and audit ready documentation. So you see, when you automate these things, when you work together, there is less time actually passed between developing the product or the feature, documenting the product or the feature, testing the product or the feature, maybe going to other several rounds of compliance checks and all of that. DocOps, okay, let's just move ahead before I go. Very good. Then we have agile writing and DocOps. Okay, so I'll stop here and then I'll talk about agile and then maybe even why we have DocOps. So one of the constraints that organizations or companies have with their documentation and production team is the lag in documentation. I'm going to use where I work, for example. So we have a product being shipped, I think maybe by the end of the month or something. And I kid you not, there is no proper documentation for this product. And I know that I'm talking about DocOps and I should have done better, but then it's something that we're just getting into at this point. So it's we're not very perfect at it. So what happened is that the development team, they were really, really building in isolation. So they had their own meeting time stand-ups and then targets and everything, and they just kept building and building. whilst in the documentation team, we sort of like focused on something else, and then everybody was just focused on different things. So now there is a product and there's no documentation, and it's about to be shipped, it's about to be released, there's a lot of testing going on, and not everybody was working together, and that sort of like defeats the whole essence, because nobody wants to send out a product without proper documentation. So this is actually what led to us wanting to adopt DocOps in the company, so that the situation where there's a product and there isn't documentation, there isn't proper testing, doesn't actually come up. And that's where agile technical writing comes in. What is agile? Basically working, top speed, fast pace, everybody's working together. There's no room for lags at all. So and then agile comes into technical writing and DocOps by making sure that documentation is part of the development pipeline, such that the devs are working, the docs people are working, the operations people are working, everybody's working together. It's saving the company time, it's saving the company resources, and it's also fostering a sort of trust, a sort of trust from the users or the, clients or whatever product and in the company. We have DocOps, continuous integration and documentation. So what does DocOps do exactly? And I say this as somebody who has seen the bad side of not implementing DocOps and, wanting to do better. So DocOps helps with real-time updates and ensures accurate documentation. So like I said, in my company, how we have a product ready, but then no documentation. If the docs team had been working hand in hand with the development team, with the production team, the documentation obviously will be real time because it's hand in hand with them, and then it's be more accurate. It's easier to write documentation, and this is my own personal opinion. It's easier to write documentation of a product that you saw being built, a product that you were part of the building process. It's already all built, and then you weren't really involved in the building process, and then you're just writing. It's going to be good, but then it's more accurate when you are involved in the building process. Then you're able to flow and then carry along your users or your readers. And there's something I personally believe that it's why it's good to go along with the development team is because when the development team was building, besides building the product, they found ways that the product wouldn't work. So that is what you, as a docs engineer or a doc specialist, a writer, would know. You know that, okay, you can use the product in XYZ way, but then you also know or got to find out that you can't use the product in XYZ way. So knowing knowledge like that actually helps you craft good documentation, especially when you go to the FAQ section of your documentation. These questions when somebody wants to ask you, can I use this product in this way, can I use it in that way, and then because you were part of the building process or the development process, you're able to tell them, no, you can't, you've tried it, no, you can't, and all of that. So we have implementing DocOps, a step-by-step guide. And as I am saying this, I'm also actually taking notes because, like I said, this is something that we are actively working on, actively trying to improve our process and our workflow. So we assess the current documentation process. Ours is bad. So I have already really assessed it, and we've seen that it's not good enough for what we're trying to do. So you select tools supporting automation and integration. I'll talk about the tools later in a different slide, but then I can just name some, like the example I've been using since for editing work is you can use Grammarly, we can use Quillbot for generating code as it comes with generating documentation as it comes with code. We can use Java Docs and the rest of them. Automate tasks like formatting and publishing. We can do that with Grammarly and foster a collaborative culture. I think the collaboration is really, really, really important in whatever it is you're doing for DocOps, because when the teams are working in isolation, they're working in silos. Once that synergy is broken, the real time and the accuracy affected, So the documentation team is writing something, and maybe the dev team is building something else, and then the operations team is doing something else entirely. And then when they all come together, there are discrepancies, there are these loopholes, there are these things that, create inaccurate or unbalanced documentation, and it becomes an actual problem. So we have tools for DocOps are finally here. So I like to say, I purposely put this first line here. When you think of tools for DocOps, think of tools that reduce redundant manual effort and replaces it with automation or semi-automation. So why I put this here is that I don't know whenever I talk about DocOps, I don't know, people are expecting, something from start to finish. There might actually be things that do start to finish, but I don't think they're start to finish, because if there's something start to finish, then it actually removes the human effort there. And when there's no human effort in documentation or deck writing, it makes it more mechanical and robotic. So, but think of DocOps as anything that fosters automation, anything that reduces actual human effort. So we have tools like Grammarly for editing your document. The Grammarly is my preferred option. Of course, there are other options for editing and looking through the documents. We have Confluence for Synergy. We have Java Docs and Sphinx. I want to talk about them especially. So these are tools that I got to find out about recently, where you can actually generate like auto-generated documentation or content from the code that is being written. However, it does involve you, or it does require the development team to write very, very um, detailed comments on their code, so that the product is able to generate the documentation for them. So you see, when you have things like that, it just makes the whole process easier. Now you don't have to, it's basically replacing the docs person in the development process, because the tool like Java Docs, for example, is serving as the docs representative in the documentation process. So what it does is, from the code that was written, from the comments that was written in the code, it generates some, you can call it a first draft, right? Because I like to call it the first draft and not the actual documentation, because like I said, these things, they remove the human nature in these things, make it sound so mechanical, so just straightforward, and doesn't really give room for maybe human faults and all of that. So when you get this first draft, it just makes it a lot easier. And you're able to now edit, review, add maybe more human or personal touches, and improve on the documentation the way you can, or the way you should. So you see that these tools help to reduce human effort. They just basically reduce a lot of things that we would have done. Templify, what the one feature that I like about Templify is that brings it gives you, like, you set a tone, or how do I call it, consistency for your documentation. And Templify basically just, it flies within. It makes sure that every documentation you're uploading, everything you're doing, follows that same consistency, follows that same style. It maintains your, you can call it like a style guide checker for your documentation. It also helps you arrange your documentation. You can impute different pieces of documentation like text, charts, images, videos. And then Templify helps you bring everything together in a more user-friendly and visually appealing manner. Then best practices for DocOps. Start with a pilot project. Like, my organization already currently filled with these products that we are shipping out very soon, but then we are starting small. Actually, there are features in the products that we are actually starting with, where the docs team is actively involved in the development. So the reason why you start with a small project is because big projects can get, they can get really bulky really soon, and then a lot of just a lot becomes gets into it. And if you're somebody that's not used to, or you're an organization that's not used to DocOps, it might actually become too much for you to handle. So that is why you start with a small project, acquaint yourself with these tools, get used to using these tools, and integrating them in your workflow, because using them is one thing, integrating them in your workflow is another. So you learn how to put them in and how to work with them. They have maintained documentation consistency. Of course, when you don't write this way for one product or for one feature and write the other way for another product, another feature, there has to be consistency in the way you write. So, just to reiterate that DocOps, these tools do not actually take away human effort. They are meant to reduce a lot of manual tasks, but then they're not meant to reduce human effort. So it's still on you to actually make sure that your documentation is consistent with your brand or your product or your organization's identity and the message that they're actually trying to give out to the users, which comes to prioritizing user experience. So you have to consider that at the end of the day, these automation tools are machines, and machines can sometimes break or fail. So you have to consider that and know that it's important to you that your users get the best experience from your product and from your documentation at every single point in time. So don't think, oh, okay, I have these tools, I'm going to relax, I'm not going to go over the documentation, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that. No, it doesn't work that way. Embrace continuous improvement and invest in team training and resources, because some of these products, they actually require some learning curve to get used to them. So it's okay for you to allow your docs team to practice these things, to learn these things, especially like I said, in a pilot project, so that they get used to it, and then it becomes an organizational standard to include DocOps. Then we have the future of DocOps, AI-powered writing assistant very soon. And just to mention, that is part of the product that we are shipping out. We are shipping out an entirely AI-based system, like basically your AI best friend at this point that helps you with a lot of things. And then advancements in documentation operations, documentation automation. So hopefully very soon, maybe there will be tools that, like, if the documentation process is 100%, maybe there will be tools soon that maybe get from 0 to 50 or 0 to 70 or 80 or even 90, making the work of the actual human to just be 10%. So that way the human is able to focus on other things, refine and make better. Expansion beyond software documentation. I was talking to somebody recently, and the person said whenever he hears the word documentation, he only thinks about API documentation. Doesn't even know that documentation actually lives outside of API documentation. Documentation is in every industry. Any product that is shipped for users or businesses, clients, anything at all requires documentation, because you need to tell people how to use your product. You need to tell people when to use your product or why to use your product. And all of these come into the documentation. So when we talk about documentation, we shouldn't only think about software industry. You should try to, we take these tools to other industries, say a car manufacturer or a battery manufacturer, and then they have these user guides, they have these user manuals, and then they can use these tools as well to make things easier and better for them, increase adoption across industries. So the key takeaways from today or from my lecture is that DocOps integrates documentation into the DevOps lifecycle. It improves collaboration, quality, and automation of documentation, overcomes cultural and technical challenges to implement DocOps, and expect continued evolution, and growth of DocOps practices. So this is a bit of a summary of everything that we have talked about. We have talked about how, DocOps integrates into development cycle, how DocOps brings the Docs team, the Dev team, and the Ops team together to work as one, so that one person or one team doesn't build in isolation, sorry, of the other team. It improves collaboration. And we also learned how there, like I gave an example of my own organization, about the cultural and some technical challenges that are being faced and that we're overcoming and everything. So that brings me to the very end of my presentation. Thank you all so much, first for being patient and also for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Dumebi, for that insightful session on DocOps and sharing your expertise with us. We open the room for Q&A now. I see a question in the chat. It's from Pushparaj. He's asking, DocOps will reduce manpower also, right? Like AI. What is your opinion on that, Dumebi, if you'd like to answer that?
Sorry, could you come again?
Sure. There's a question from Pushparaj.
Yeah.
Asks, DocOps will reduce manpower like AI. What is your opinion about it?
Honestly, right? I don't actually think it would reduce as much as it would make it better. And it's also the same opinion I have about AI. So I don't think AI would reduce manpower as much as it would just make it better. So I'm going to go back to using Grammarly, for example. So you have an editor, there's somebody who was brought dedicated, like their job description is editing, but then there are tools like Grammarly that actually help with editing. It makes that person's job easier. It stops them from doing the line by line, word by word, punctuation by punctuation checking, where they are actually okay. They are working. They learn how to work with Grammarly. They learn how to make Grammarly work for them, and then editing or checking the documentation. Sorry, do I continue? Okay, so they learn to make it work for them, learn to, just integrate it into the organization or in their workflow. So you see that it doesn't actually take away manpower, it just makes it easier for you. So you have more time to do other things. So you have, for the editor, for example, you have like a host of things to work through, a host of documents to get through. You don't have to start doing it line by line. It's taking weeks, maybe months. You can actually do this thing in days. In 1 week, you're done, and then you ahead.
Thank you, Dumebi. Does anyone else have any questions regarding DocOps? I see a question from Shweta in the chat. She is asking about the automation tool that checks for consistency that you mentioned during your presentation.
Okay, so I said it's Templify. So Templify is only actually available to organizations. It's not available for individual use. So your organization has to actually subscribe to it, but then it checks for consistency with your brand image, your brand identity, how previous documentation has been before, and then it makes sure that current documentation or future documentation follows in the same line or follows the same steps.
Thank you. There's another question from Rajkumar Dravid. He's asking, can we know more how you use Java docs?
Okay, personally, I don't use Java docs because Java docs is actually, as the name implies, it's actually quite specific for the Java language. So there are other tools like Sphinx, for example. I think Sphinx works for Python. So there are different tools that work for different languages, and there are some tools that actually work for multiple languages. I can't really remember the one for multiple languages right now. But then Java docs works for Java, such that you write your Java code, you comment, the dev team comments detailed, like it's not just very superfluous commenting, it's actually quite detailed. And then Java Docs goes ahead to produce documentation from there, like it's automatic. It's not, there's no manual efforts required in it. So as you're writing, as you're commenting, it's generating the documentation or the content. I don't know if that answers the question.
Sure. Thank you, Dumebi.
Okay. You're welcome.
Yes. If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to Dumebi on LinkedIn, or you can also join the TWT community groups. We'll share the link in the chat soon, so you can follow those links. And now we'll take a 5-minute break. And please promptly return, as we have lined up some exciting sessions for you also. So please be back soon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.